We all know the drill. You study all year long, you go to bed early the night before, wake up early, get a good breakfast, and get to school earlier than normal. I'm sure that without me even mentioning it, you know where this is headed, standardized testing. As students, we dread it, sitting in a desk for hours as we meticulously read and answer every question. It's every student's nightmare. Today, this standardized testing is used to determine if a college accepts you, if you move on to the next grade, and even what classes you get placed in. The question to ask is, should standardized testing play such a large role in education? The answer is no. For many reasons, standardized testing does not accomplish what it was designed to do. The best way to show how standardized testing is failing is to look at the education systems of different countries. Countries such as Brazil, China, and the U.S. Each of these countries deals with education differently, and each one reveals a different problem with standardized testing. On paper, standardized testing seems like a great way to test students and find out what still needs to be taught. But like many things, the true outcome of this testing is not what it is supposed to be. A man by the name of Richard Feynman, a well-respected theoretical physicist, went to Brazil in 1950 to spend time at a physics research center. Even though this was 60 years ago, the problems there can still be found in other places around the globe. Feynman figured out that the students had memorized everything, but they didn't know what anything meant. He discovered that from a very young age, Brazilian kids were buying high-level physics textbooks and reading them. The problem was that these children were merely memorizing definitions and not how to solve problems. These students were not trying to understand physics, they just wanted to pass the test. This is what our education system is heading towards today. Students care less if they know the topic as long as they get the score they desire. In an article published by Columbia University, they state that standardized testing causes many teachers to only teach the tests. Students understand that in today's education system, as long as they get the score that is expected of them, they don't have to understand the material. If we use less standardized testing in our education system, we can reverse these effects and help students to better understand what they are learning. When someone mentions education in China, most of us automatically think of test scores and children being pushed extremely hard to succeed. I did not fully understand the Chinese education system until I read a Chinese foreign exchange student's essay on his schooling in both countries. Chang was his name, and he says that in Chinese high schools, the students go to school from 7 in the morning until 10 at night with a 2-hour lunch break. These schools do not have buses, so students must walk or ride bicycle to school. These teachers just want to see your grades on the exam, so students develop ways to cheat instead of studying. This causes students who do study hard to quit studying because the students who don't study are getting higher scores. Students who do study often spend what few hours they have at home studying. The tests here are so important that they decide the entire future of a person. Do well and you can go to the best college, and that means your salary is 2 or 3 times more than another student's. All of these factors play into the theft of childhood from these students. That is another huge problem with standardized testing. It becomes so important that we lose focus on developing creativity and ingenuity and instead focus on test-taking skills. If we don't take away some of the emphasis on testing here in America, we will see our education system become more and more similar to that of China. All of this testing is destroying any desire a child has to learn and any desire a teacher has to teach. In my own personal experience, every year or so the testing criteria changes. When this happens, it causes teachers to have to change their entire plan of teaching for that year, sometimes only to turn around and change it back the next year. This creates an unnecessary amount of stress on our nation's teachers. When anyone is exposed to this much stress in the workplace, they lose the desire to do their job. If our teachers aren't excited about learning, how can we expect our students to be excited? In order to allow variety and excitement in our education systems, we need to severely decrease the amount of standardized testing students are forced to take, especially at young ages. If we continue on the path that we are currently on, our nation's children will lose the joy of childhood. Imagine empty parks and playgrounds and not hearing children laugh and play. If students have to spend as much time at home studying for tests as they spend at school, these are things that could almost disappear entirely. Now, some people may ask, why do we even have these tests if they're so bad? There is not one simple answer to the question, but there are many. One of which is our desire to compete with other nations. Ever since America was born, our nation has had a desire to be the best at everything. This desire intensified during the Cold War when China and the USSR, two of the largest communist powers, were in an arms race with the United States. During this time, we wanted to produce the best scientists and mathematicians in the world in order to create better weapons than our enemies. Today, this desire causes politicians and the government to say they want higher test scores and pass new legislation demanding more testing. Our desire to be the best isn't the problem, though. The problem is the way we go about being the best. If we push to make students enjoy learning instead of pushing students to get a higher score, most of the time they'll achieve that score on their own. Another issue we find is testing is used to determine a student's worth. Almost every high school student across the country has heard of the ACT and the SAT. These tests are used by almost every college in the nation to determine if you should be accepted into their school. In the past, these scores have combined with other factors to determine if a student should be accepted or not. Today, we see more and more colleges setting a minimum requirement for these scores. Schools may have a low minimum score, but in order to get a lower tiered scholarship, they must have a much higher score. I experienced this year when I applied to the University of Kentucky. UK, as it is referred to, does not have a set minimum ACT score, though the average score is 23 to 28. My score of 30 overall was well enough to get accepted, but the scholarship tier that would help me the most, apart from a full ride, needed a score of 31. I tried 3 times this year, and each time I received a 30, no matter how much I studied. A lot of good students run into this problem with testing. Some great students who have had all the right criteria fail to receive what they need to go to their preferred school, simply because they may be a poor test taker. With these tests gaining precedence over these other factors, students are missing out on good learning opportunities that they deserve because of one bad test score. So now that you know how detrimental standardized testing can be to a student's education, how colleges rely on these scores too heavily, and how other countries suffer because of the emphasis they placed on these tests, and how our nation is rapidly increasing the number of tests and placing more and more emphasis on them. Do you know that we have to cut back on standardized testing and stop making it so important to our education system?